Hello, my name is Rob MacDonald. I'm the Managing Director of SSEN Transmission. SSEN Transmission are responsible for the transmission network in the renewable rich and rugged north of Scotland. Effectively, we're the motorway of the electricity network, taking power from the power stations down to cities and towns and ultimately final customers. We have a network of underground and subsea cables and overhead line. We take great pride in the stewardship of our assets, and we've invested more than £3 billion over the last decade in upgrading the network, connecting renewable generation and ensuring security of supply. I think SSEN Transmission has a huge role to play in meeting the challenges of net zero, and that's why we've got a very ambitious plan for the T2 period. That plan is centred around 5 clear goals for 5 years of the price control period. Firstly, we will connect enough generation to power 10 million homes in GB. Secondly, we will ensure 100% reliability for businesses and customers. Thirdly, we will deliver 100% of our connections on time. Fourth, we will ensure that our own greenhouse gas emissions are reduced by 1/3, consistent with the pathway to net zero. And finally, recognising the importance of value to the customer, we have a plan that includes, we initially targeted 100 million, it's actually close to 200 million of efficiency savings to the benefit of customers. Tackling climate change is the greatest challenge of our generation. And that challenge frames the imperative, not just in our business plan, but in the other large projects that will go through Ofgem's uncertainty mechanism as part of the Rio T2 process. The government is committed to hitting net zero targets by 2045 in Scotland and by 2050 in the rest of GB. This will necessitate a paradigm shift in the generation of electricity and the way it is transported across the country. Greater decarbonisation frankly means greater electrification. We are expecting, for example, demand to double from 2020 to 2050. The additional generation to meet this demand must come from renewable sources if we're going to hit net zero targets. That means we must move from carbon-based fuels to renewable generation on an unprecedented scale. And we must put in place the infrastructure to ensure that generation is transported to where it's needed. Our transmission system in the north of Scotland must be reconfigured so that we can transport that generation from the renewable rich sources of power in the north of Scotland down to the main source of demand in southern England. That will require significant investment in our network. And to put that in some context, we expect to have to spend roughly 2 or 3 times the amount of investment in the next decade compared to what we spent in the last decade. Whilst the most material impact our business has on the environment is undoubtedly the connection of renewable generation, we also recognise absolutely that we have a responsibility to reduce our own impact on the environment. As a consequence, as part of our drive to net zero, we've also set ourselves ambitious targets to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We are absolutely delighted that our ambitious targets have been recognised by the globally renowned Science Based Targets initiative. This means we are the only electricity network company in the whole world to achieve accreditation for reducing greenhouse gas emissions consistent with a 1.5 degree pathway. We are leading the way in the drive for net zero, but it won't happen by itself. It will require significant investment, it'll require innovation, it'll require a commitment to stakeholder engagement, and it also requires taking substantial risks if we're going to achieve these very ambitious targets. We at SSEN Transmission recognise the great challenges we are facing and also recognise the huge opportunity we have to make a positive contribution to achieving those ambitious targets. That's why we called our plan a network for net zero, and that's why we're absolutely committed to delivering it.